There we go. So my name is Tony Fross, and I look after our organization and culture practice with my partner, Helen Rose Thorne in London. And also with me today are Jonathan Chajet, who you can see on the screen there. Jonathan's a partner in our practice who looks after our purpose and values offerings. And Tyler Durham should join us sometime in process. He looks after our talent and capabilities offers. He's in a client meeting, which is going to run a little long, but he should join us, as I said, in progress. But Jonathan's here now. JC, why don't you say hello so everyone can hear your sonorous voice?
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. So let's jump into our first poll question. We'd like to get a sense of the mix of roles that we have on the line today. So please let us know which of these best matches your role. Branding communications, marketing and sales, HR, research and insights, customer experience / UX, strategy, change management, operations, or consulting, because we know that some of our friends from other consulting firms also join, as well as in-house consultants. So if you can just let us know, that would be great.
I'll click here.
What do we got? Interesting. Brand HR, and then a little bit of everything else. And I'm very curious who you others are. Since we've got all the questions up, we'll do them all at once. Which transformations have inspired you? See Netflix, Starbucks, other. For those of you who are choosing other, I'd love for you to throw into the chat who you're thinking of when you think of other, because we're always interested to know where people are finding inspiration. And looks like people want to use this to facilitate a conversation with their colleagues primarily. Great. All right, so now we've jumped through all of our poll questions all at once. Please feel free, since it's open, to add if you've not yet had a chance to throw your answers in there. We'll skip the poll slides and jump right into this slide here. So as those of you who are most familiar with Profit know, our Altimeter Group analyst team has been pioneering open source research on digital topics for about 11 years, and digital transformation specifically for the last 8 years now. And in our most recent 2018 State of Digital Transformation report from Brian Solis, you'll see that when asked about the top 3 priorities in transforming the employee experience, creating a culture of innovation and empowerment was something where just under 50% of the respondents said it was in their top 3, which is a surge of over 65% from last year. Now, what's interesting about that to us in the organization and culture practice is that as more and more companies have been launching digital transformation programs, many are now in their 2nd, 3rd, or even 4th iteration of that transformation. And this increase in the focus on culture suggests to us that the more you know about digital transformation, the more important you realize culture is as a component of your long-term success. Thank you. And I see, Brendan, you said you were referring to Ford. Yes, to a human mobility services company. That's very interesting. I will come back to that because we've actually done some work in that space that I can talk to as well. So, those companies that you listed and selected are the winners. But why do so many others fail? And for anybody who's been in this space for a while, we all have not just the trophies, but the scars from trying to deliver digital transformations. And we think it's because so many of these companies rush to technology as the solution. They underinvest in their middle management. And my partner, Helen, really believes that you really need to win in the middle. And they fail to signal progress because they focus on the challenges and not the early wins. And you'll see that come back later in this conversation as something that we've discovered is quite important. In the end, organizations decide that, or the rank and file of the organizations decide that digital transformation is just the flavor of the month or the calendar year. And like so many other efforts, it's just going to go away. Or perhaps even if they were enthusiastic about the idea of the transformation early on, they lose hope. And in the end, nothing changes. So to speak to that point, if you can pop one forward, Jonathan. We really love this quote and think it's particularly apropos, which is, you only really understand your culture when you try to change it. It's only at that moment that the complexity of the elements that create culture, like so many different things that must come together, those elements and their misalignments, they really make themselves clear when you try to make some real significant change. And actually, in fact, I want to share a quick story about this. Tyler and I were in Boston recently with the leadership team of a financial services firm, and we led an exercise where we converged with the team on a set of about 10 key facts regarding the current state of their culture. And looking at the list, one really powerful woman in the room said, you know, I've been here for 10 years and we're such a consensus-driven culture and people are generally very amiable, and we've captured that as one of our key facts. But it's only after this dialogue where I'm looking at the fact that we also converged on the key fact that we actually incentivize people not to collaborate with other functions, that it dawned on me that the reason that certain people or teams have not been meeting their commitments or meeting my expectations was because their functions actually incentivize them not to deliver. And she said, I honestly had never understood that before, that the system that they had set up was actively working to create this counterintuitive outcome because they'd sub-optimized in terms of their incentives. And I thought that was interesting, that it was only at this moment we were talking about making change, and we'd just done this one little exercise where, despite her having been there 10 years, she suddenly realized the complexity of the system and some of the different levers that we might have to move in order to make real change. So with that as the challenge, understanding the complexity of your organization and its culture, let's talk about what we found in the research and what actually does move the needle. So the quick summary is, no surprise, there's no silver bullet. No single tactic will ensure the success of your digital transformation. You need to focus on all four areas of what we call our human-centered transformation model. We refer to as DNA, body, mind, and soul. We'll talk a lot about that today. The good news, however, is that some actions really do matter more than others. And there's a set of fundamentals and accelerators that we're going to share, which we think are going to help accelerate whatever it is that you are working on from a transformation perspective. And finally, and this was both heartening to learn and also reinforcing of our own experience in the trenches, we learned that digital transformations simply require more effort than other transformations, in part because they challenge the core of how the company might best be able to innovate and continue to create value in a business landscape that's just so continuously disruptive at that point. And so what that means, the implication there, is that you really have to start at the leadership level and work your way through all the layers of the organization in a fairly programmatic way and make deep changes everywhere to be successful with digital transformation. So with that as the preface, I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan to actually dive into the detail from the report.
Thank you, Tony. So as Tony mentions, in work with our clients, we've seen that the transformations that tend to be more successful put a number of tactics in play. Really, anything is on the table to get things to work. And they're also thinking very carefully about how the tactics interact with one another so that they play well in the sandbox. I certainly can't ask people to measure people against something, but give them no power to affect that result. And so all those elements need to work together. So we have developed a model we call the human-centered transformation model, that looks at the full range of tactics that management can employ as it looks at aligning the culture to their strategic initiatives, in this case to digital transformation. At the center of the model is an organization's DNA, where a company defines its most treasured aspirations and principles and really makes clear where, who are we, what business are we in, what do we stand for as both a business and a brand. And that DNA is so crucial to transformation because it answers the question, where are we going? And what about us needs to change in order to get there? As you sort of move then to sort of the slices of the pie, the next component that we work with clients on is the soul. of the company. This is where an organization helps employees understand what mindsets and behaviors are key to the transformation. For us, inspiration is at the heart of any transformation, hence our heart symbol, because it answers that question, what does great look like? And that, I think, is such a key element for companies. I'm doing a lot of work right now with a digitally native company that really loathes structure, they loathe governance, and they are so driven by inspiration. But one of the things that people then lack is, I don't know what great looks like, and I don't, therefore it's really hard for me to model that. And so soul is really crucial to to any kind of change management or transformation initiative. Next, we get into what we call the mind, where a company starts to define the kinds of skills and capabilities it needs in order to enable the transformation. Mind is really crucial because it answers the question, what do I need to do? And do I have the skills, the capability to do it? It's very scary for people who are going through a digital transformation when the company is moving into parts of the business that they just personally don't feel confident in being able to deliver on and execute. And therefore, I feel my job is at stake, and therefore, I'm going to sort of stand in the way of this change. And then finally, in body, the organization sets out the operating model. That really sort of makes clear what's the structure, the governance, the roles, and the responsibilities, and answers the question, how should we work together to make this transformation real? And so you really get into really the structural elements of change. And together, when you put all of these elements together, it helps an organization to kind of shape the culture that it wants and needs in order to make a strategic transformation real, make it action. So this model really helps our clients to sort of see what tactics they need to put into play. And we use these tactics as we explored some of the challenges that the participants in the research are going through as they think about their transformation. So we did a study, quite comprehensive. We spoke with about 400 executives in the US, UK, Germany, and China. The majority of the participants work in medium to large organizations. They're undergoing some kind of transformation. There's a balance of industries and types of transformations that are happening, but we did take a particular emphasis on digitally driven transformations. And then the participants tended to certainly skew to a more senior level of the organization who really had very large remits for change, that they had a responsibility role in those transformations. And so the first part, onto the actual findings, is that they were really, what we started first with is, what are the fundamentals of these transformation efforts? What are the fundamental things we must do if we're going to be successful? Essentially the essentials of change. These minimum actions really are key here, and there were, for us, 6 that rose to the top when our participants reflected back on recent transformations. At the top of the list is, not surprisingly, developing training to reskill existing talent. This isn't that surprising because this is a major concern. If I'm a manager, I've got to make sure that my teams have the ability to do what we're asking them to do in this future vision of the organization. But right behind this, and not that far behind, as you can see from the data, was a fundamental need to have a clearly defined roadmap. As the old saying goes, if you don't know where you're going, all roads get you there. And this is more than just about having a really clear plan of attack. It's also about creating a really clear picture of where the organization is going. And then finally, our participants identified the role that leadership needs to play in the transformation. This really is partly about who is leading the charge, but also it's about the leaders really role modeling the future behaviors that it wants to see in its employees. There were certainly other factors like decision rights, KPIs, and tools that were also identified as fundamental transformation.
Jonathan,
yeah.
I wanted to just build. I think we talk a lot about leadership in our practice. I see that Tyler Durham has joined us. It's one of his favorite topics. I think one of the things that's embedded in this is the idea that you might define leadership as providing the clarity that allows others to take unambiguous action. And part of what we see all throughout this is the desire for that clarity. What's the roadmap? Who exactly is in charge? The idea of pushing decision rights downward. How exactly am I empowered to enable that change to happen? I think that theme is woven through the entire output that we got from this research.
That's great. Good point. Okay, great. So if we look at these for 6 fundamentals, think of these as sort of the stated importance that our participants mentioned. We then took a look at what we have identified as the accelerators. You can think of these as the derived importance. And these really are what we think of as the hidden drivers that can really make all the difference. They can be deployed in their own right or in combination with the fundamentals. For a lot of the participants, this really was the difference between good and great. So at the top of the list is this notion of rapidly sharing successes and lessons learned. For us, this is crucial for 2 reasons. First, many organizations are doing these transformations in an agile model, which is not about speed. It's not about making it go faster, but about a very iterative prioritization. Is this still important? Is this what we want to tackle? So understanding what's working and not working in a very quick fashion, a very kind of iterative fashion, helps everyone to accelerate that change. And second, success breeds success. It gives employees a mental picture of what great looks like so they can rinse and reapply in their own roles. So this really was, for us, really powerful lesson about how to accelerate transformation. The second accelerator is about aligning incentives for cross-functional work. A lot of transformation is about collaboration and about breaking down organizational silos, about thinking about new ways of working and going to market in different ways. This means that the organization has to make sure that it's rewarding. How it's rewarding people isn't looking at what the past is, but about what the future looks like. It requires putting your money where your mouth is and making sure that the incentives are aligned. And for us, this really gives that transformation a bullhorn. It's a loudspeaker, a bully pulpit that says, look, we really believe these are the things that we have to do, and we're going to reward that. And then finally, just right behind this incentive is another accelerator, which is about setting a powerful, actionable ambition for the organization. So one of my favorites that I always hear clients sort of play back to me is, well, a great ambition was when Jack Kennedy said, we're going to put a man on moon. And that was for the country incredibly inspiring because it set out something extraordinary. But he added something really important afterwards. He said, we've got to do it within a decade. And when he did that, even though a decade seems like a long time, he created a sense of urgency. And what we see is that transformation accelerates when the end state is really clear and inspiring, but it also feels that it's within reach. And that, for us, was a lesson that we're pulling out that people are telling us is key to sort of successful transformation. Okay. Pause there. Okay. One important point that we just did want to point out here is we are talking really a lot of the fundamentals and the accelerators that we're talking about are really true for any transformation or really any change that you're trying to affect in a culture to support some strategic initiative. But there are some qualities that do seem unique specifically to digital transformation that we thought were worth mentioning. In digital transformations, the DNA of the organization plays a particularly important role. From the ambition to the leadership roles to demonstrated behaviors, being clear about what the organization stands for and why we're changing seems to inspire change. This might be because digital transformation so often includes real changes in the business model in ways that may make the organization look very different. And so when the business is changing so much, what do I have to hold on to? Well, it's that ambition, that DNA, those values of the organization are what I know that I should be able to hold on to clearly, no matter what business I'm in or how I do that business. So having a clear picture of where we're going and that our leaders are committed to that change really helps a transformation to stay on track. Oftentimes you're asking in a digital transformation, you're asking teams who may be working in an agile way to be kind of work separate, and they won't have all the instructions, that they actually have to make the destinations a little bit more. They have to make it up as they go. And so having a clear sense of what we're doing, why we're doing it, helps them to stay on point. Whereas if you think about non-digital transformations, they tend to lean a lot more heavily into the soul of the organization. That is, the change may be more focused on a particular aspect of the business. Say we're making a big change in our product portfolio, or in some kind of brand change, or some customer experience. So one aspect, and therefore a lot of the tactics tend to be focused on specific behaviors. Those tend to be more impactful in non-digital transformation initiatives. Okay, Tony, you want to?
Yeah. So up front, I promised that we'd share a few insights that we didn't include in the report. And as Jonathan mentioned, we did do this work in two parts. So the first, we did a lot of executive one-on-one deep dives, and sometimes 2 and 3-on-1 deep dives with teams who were doing major transformations to try to test our hypotheses about which are the approaches and the tactics that we should take a look at in the quant arm. And the first insight, especially when we compared what people were saying to what they were actually doing, was that knowledge of what should be done is not necessarily equal to an understanding of why or how to do it. And even that is not necessarily equal to the execution of it. And what I mean by that, Jonathan was just talking about, for instance, the importance of a transformational, inspiring, and time-bound ambition. So lots of people in the qualitative interviews would say, oh yeah, it's really important to have a strong vision, and it needs to be clear. And we'd say, good, we thought that might be important. Can you share yours with us? Crickets. They couldn't remember their own supposedly simple ambition or vision statement at all. And people would say, it's something sort of like, or I don't know, it's on a slide somewhere, I'll get it back to you. And part of what that means is that in terms of being able to communicate that into the organization and have it achieve its actual purpose, you simply can't do it if the senior leaders themselves have already forgotten it. And we've seen that in the best transformations, because those vision or ambition statements are so simple and easy to understand and time-bound and measurable, that means that they're only a sentence or two long, and everybody can repeat, if not the entire thing word for word, all the key concepts. So that was the first thing. People are saying, yes, we believe that this is important, but then in the few instances where they were able to share it, it didn't actually match their own stated description of what good likes and what we know, what good looks like and what we know good looks like. And then in many cases, they simply weren't able to execute on it. And in some cases that may have been, they knew that it should be done that way, but they couldn't overcome the politics to get it done, any number of reasons why. But that was the first big aha. The second thing is that mindset really drives experience. And part of what we mean about that is a lot of the executives who are driving successful digital transformations today are not themselves anything like digital natives. They're Gen Xers and in some case, boomers. And part of what that means is they may not actually have a huge amount of hands-on delivery experience in doing major digital initiatives, but they've been able to understand enough about what needs to be done. They quote unquote get digital, and they have a digital first mindset. And that makes a huge difference. And we heard that in the sort of transformations that they were describing being able to achieve. And just yesterday, as it happens, I was out on a panel with a major healthcare firm who asked us to come in and talk about transformation. And one of the things that we observed as we listened to dialogue prior to actually getting on stage is that there's a tendency, and we've seen this elsewhere, to talk about digital as an adjunct as opposed to digital first. So we're marketers, for instance, and we're doing more and more digital marketing, you might hear them say, as opposed to we've shifted to all of our strategies are digital first, and everything else that we've done traditionally is now being moved to the 20%. That becomes the adjunct. And so the executives who have a digital first mindset drive faster, more successful transformations in our view. Again, this is coming out of our qualitative insights. The last thing is that so many organizations talk about the importance of measurement. And then in the qualitative interviews, we could hear how desperately humans naturally avoid measurement. So we would say, is your ambition measurable? And people would say, yeah, kind of, but they couldn't articulate specifically how they were measuring the success of their transformation. And I think there's a tendency to look at metrics as potential sticks, as opposed to they are quantitative tools for higher quality conversations in the organization. Your metrics may change over time, but you need to have something to hold yourselves accountable and have the conversation about, is the transformation moving at the pace that we intend, and how close are we to the trajectory that we'd anticipated in moving towards our ambition. So I just wanted to share those three things because they're things that came out of the qual that we did not put in the report. And I thought that'd be a little bonus for those of you who've taken the time to sign in with us today. So we've taken quite enough time. Looking at my watch, it's now halfway through, so it's time for your questions. So we're gonna open up and take a look at the chat and see if there's specific things that you might like us to answer, which we've not yet addressed. And there's a little chat panel there for you to put in whatever you like, or Nicola, you can also, I think, allow people to speak. But either way, if you want to type it, that would be great. Thoughts, comments, questions? All right, while we wait for some stuff to come in, I noticed that Brendan Rafferty said that he was thinking about Ford when it comes to digital transformation, specifically how they're trying to transform from an automobile manufacturer to a human mobility services company. And I think that is quite an interesting transformation. One of the things that we know from our work in that industry and other players who are making that transformation, because Ford has stated their ambition quite clearly, but they're hardly the only ones after it, is that there's a lot of focus, not just on the technology of mobility, but on data and how to create value exchanges with connected customers in connected vehicles. And this goes back to the fact that digital is fundamentally always a data play, that at the end of the day, part of what digital is about is finally being able to understand something about the relationship with your customers, both through passive digital exhaust that you capture, as well as open active channels that you use to interact with them. And so when we look at what Ford's trying to achieve, part of it, yes, is going to be on what are the technologies like autonomy that they are successful in bringing to market. That's going to be part of it. But the other part of it is also going to be how well are they able to actually define the kinds of data that they need to create value and then actually execute against that. From Kay Kelsey, I don't know if Kay, if that is a Mr. or a Ms. Did you look at how physical workspace plays into the success of a digital transformation? No, not explicitly in this research, although that is a passion of mine specifically. And what I would say about that is three things. So first, when you look at physical environments and you look at the kind of interactions that they're designed for, broadly speaking, we talk about programmed and unprogrammed interactions. So programmed interactions are spaces that we come to specifically for the purposes of doing something, whether that's a war room for collaboration or a conference room for didactic presentation. Unprogrammed interactions happen in the spaces generally in between those spaces that we use for programmed interaction. And what we've observed with organizations that have done good work in space design around transformation in general is that they think a lot about unprogrammed interactions in a fairly conscious way. So for instance, they may use the kitchen as a central hub to bring people together for those unprogrammed interactions. One of the best examples that I've seen comes from a number of years ago, where there were two different teams in different locations that they were trying to create more unprogrammed interactions with. And what they did was there was a matching corridor that people had to enter in both facilities to get to the break rooms and the pantries. And so what they did is they set up video cameras in both hallways and screens in both hallways, so that as I was walking through the Florida facility, the person who was walking through the California facility, I could see on the wall. And there was the ability to have an active conversation, even though we were geographically in different places. And then also the ability to move that conversation into a live video breakout. We also see really great use of technologies like Beam that bring telepresence to robots so that people can roll around, and the actual biomorphic shape of the beam tends to make it more engaging. You pay attention to someone who's on a beam in a way that you don't necessarily to someone who's on a screen. So we've seen that as an important thing in digital transformation. And that means that you have to set up a physical space so that people can actually navigate them fairly easily with beams. So those are some things that we've seen. The other thing has to do with, in general, the pods and squads models that drive the most advanced digital transformations mean that you need a lot of war room spaces. You need team spaces where people can bring cross-functional teams together to do the work. And one of the most interesting environments that way that I've had the ability to spend some time in is if you go to Spotify's offices, the pod spaces are actually delineated in most cases by webs, and you can find photos of this online, webs of string. So while there is some oral privacy, which is created by the way sound dampening is done in the space, visually, all of the pods have a lot of transparency to them. You can see into them because of the string walls. And it's enough of a screen that it provides a little bit of visual privacy, but it also means that you can always see that work's going on. And I think that also cultivates a certain amount of unprogrammed interactions, which are important to speed progress when you're doing cross-functional work. So that would be what I'd say, some of our observations about physical spaces that are successful for digital transformation, but it wasn't something that was specific to this leg of research. Other thoughts, comments, questions? You're very welcome. Tyler, hey, I can see you.
Hey, Tony. I thought I would just pick up on that because it jogged my memory about something, and nice question, Kristen. So thanks for asking that. I think the other piece that's interesting around, that's an undercurrent behind a lot of the data that we've talked about is the role of how do we use analytics to help put the right people in the right places to do a lot of this. And so the role of network analytics and where we can begin to get, if we once used to anchor on how do we get the best people with the best and right talent, which is still extremely important. What really begins to accelerate is how do we also put those people in the place of most potential. Sometimes that's in a digital space or a social space, but oftentimes it's in a physical space too. So oftentimes it's your question about physical space is complemented by the use of network analytics to accelerate some of this as well, which is a topic we could spend more time on, but I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. I noticed in the Q&A, and for those of you who haven't noticed, there is a box at the bottom of the screen which specifically says Q&A. Brendan writes that we use the phrase human-centered something, and when we use the phrase human-centered, are there particular concepts or ideas that you're pulling from in terms of human-centered design and design thinking? So the answer to that is we call our model a human-centered transformation model. So the idea that the human has as a macrocosm the organization. So as a human, you have DNA, body, mind, and soul, and the organization does as well. And so that as above, so below model is what we call the human-centered transformation model. The reason that we use the phrase human-centered is threefold. So the first is because at the end of the day, and Tyler says this all the time that I love, businesses don't change. People change, and then people change the business. And so transformation happens when the organization as a collective of humans changes. They change in terms of their mindsets and their rituals. There are new skills brought in, that's what we call mind. They decide to change the operating model, what we call the body, and they have a new DNA that they create collectively, some sort of an ambition to where they're going. And a lot of transformational models have in many ways taken the emphasis off of people in a way, particularly in the digital transformation space. But at the end of the day, no matter how digital your firm is, at the core of it are some humans who are attaching the front end of your business and the back end of your operations. There's people in the middle there somewhere. And so when we use the phrase human-centered, part of what we're trying to do is bring the emphasis back on people as the core element of a transformation. Now, when you ask about design thinking and human-centered design, is that part of the inspiration for that? Yes, very much so. Most of us in our practice are deep in design thinking because of the history of profit and where we've all come from. And also, since you mentioned that you're a grad student studying design right now, I would suggest that you take a look at the history of design thinking, because what's actually interwoven in there is the history of creative problem solving, or what's called applied creativity, and what people now refer to as innovation. And design thinking is really something that's a blend of those different disciplines that come all together and has been branded as design thinking, but there are underlying core disciplines that go back for some time. If you look at, or if you want to email me later, I can send you some texts that you might want to look at that give you a little bit of that history. I teach occasionally in design schools, which is why I'm double clicking on that one. Other thoughts, comments, questions that we might answer for you while we're all here? All right. Well, I don't want to hold people any longer if you don't have any other questions that we can answer for you. So I want to thank you all very much for joining us. As I mentioned at the beginning, for anyone who's not yet downloaded the report, you can find it on profit.com/thinking, or you can click on this image of the report when you get this PDF in our follow-up email immediately after the webinar. I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. We'll be doing another one of these webinars in July and another one in August. So if you have friends or colleagues who might be interested, please encourage them to sign up. And I'd just like to wish you all a great rest of your day. And for those of us who are in the US, happy July 4th next week. So long.
Bye-bye.